And it's recording. Okay, very cool. All right, let me get this screen all up and running. All right, can everybody see my shared screen right now?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, very cool. Well, hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zach. I'm an exercise science student from CSU, and I'm interning here at APS in wellness. And for today's Lunch and Learn, I'm going to be talking about health, aging, and disease prevention, like chronic disease prevention. That just doesn't fit so well on a slide, so I'm calling it health, aging, and prevention. And yeah, like I said, this is live and virtual, so if I'm looking up or down, it's because I'm trying to talk to everyone. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started here. So little icebreaker. What is the best piece of advice you've ever received? Go ahead and put that in the chat there, and then I will be looking at both the chat and people in the room here. So I'll go ahead and read out anything that happens. What we got? Best piece of advice. Everything in moderation in the chat. That's a good one. In the room, we have a don't stop doing it until you're not able to do it. Was that right?
Well, if you stop doing it, you won't be able to do it.
If you stop doing it, you won't be able to do it. Okay. That makes sense.
I have a similar one. You don't stop playing because you grow old. You grow old because you stop playing.
You don't stop playing because you grow old. You grow old because you stop playing. Is that right?
Yeah.
All right. Nice. In the chat, we have take a walk every day, working out and doing things in balance. Once someone shows you who they are, believe them. Spend money on good shoes. I like that one. That's funny. I got a good shoe collection myself.
Hard work beats talent.
Hard work beats talent in the room here.
When talent doesn't work hard.
When talent doesn't work hard?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's a good addition. Yeah, I like that one. Mine is who cares? And it's short and sweet, but basically if there's something you want to do it. If something you want to say it. Always wanted to try learning something new, a hobby, a sport, a task, whatever it may be. Who cares? Give it a shot. So that's mine. All right, well, now that the ice is broken here, let's go ahead and really get started. So today we're going to talk about a bunch of different things. I've kind of broken it down here with my brief introduction. Then we're going to talk a little bit about like biology of aging, what's going on when we're aging, while we're aging. We're going to talk about how health changes over time. So a little short there. We're going to focus a lot about like cardiovascular disease, musculature, and a little bit of cognitive function as well. Then we'll kind of wrap things up and get to any questions you may have at the end. So without further ado, let's go into biology of aging. Got this nice little purple sign here. Okay, so what does aging mean? Well, throughout our lives, our cells slowly break down over time. You may have heard like, oh, you get a new palate, you get new taste buds every 7 or so years. And same thing goes with your like skeleton, your bones. After 7-10 years, you have a whole new set of bones that you than you had years before that. And of course, this is slowly over time. But as we age, this process actually slows down. It doesn't repair the broken down cells as quickly as it used to. And that can change in a variety of ways. We can notice it in our energy levels. We can notice it in our day-to-day strength, whether or not we're exercising and working out. You may notice differences in trends there. So it really can affect a lot of different things in a lot of different ways. And so, yeah, our bodies slow down as we age. With that, I like to think of it, the aging process, as chronological versus biological. So chronological, we want to think about time. We're thinking about days that we're alive, years, right? Every day that passes, we're 1 day older. But depending on how we treat our bodies, the biological side of things, you may be 40, 50, 60 years old, but you may feel like you're 20 or 30, and kind of the opposite can happen as well, where, you may be rather sedentary, you may eat somewhat poorly, and, you'll feel kind of more lethargic and older than you really are. And so it really works both ways there. Just as a personal example, I have two relatives, one older and one younger. I mean, of course, they're both older than me, but one on the older side of things, one on the younger side of things. And my older relative is very active. She goes skiing, maybe not double black diamond or anything like that, or moguls, but she'll get her skis and go up on the mountain. My other relative, she's maybe about 10 or so. Oh, I just got a comment. Okay. I can't see many people, but if anyone can't see me, just let me know and I'll figure out how to change that. As I was saying, the younger relative there, even though she's about 10 years younger, she has lived a more sedentary life. She doesn't eat as well, and she actually looks older than the other relative and has more like health problems. Of course, that's partly genetic. You can't control everything, but it just kind of goes to show like biological versus a chronological age there, about 10 years difference. So how our health changes over time. Like I was just saying about things that we can and can't control, as people, we like to have control over things. We want to control how our day-to-day life goes. We want to control what we eat, when we go to bed, right? All these things we want to control. But we can't stop aging. Like I was saying earlier, every second that passes, we're 1 second older. And same goes for days and years, right? You're 35, then you're 36, then you're 40, then all of a sudden you're 50, right? Like these things just happen on their own. We can't control that, but we can control how we choose to live our lives. We can control what we do day to day to improve our strength, our heart health, to prevent, cardiovascular disease. We can control our brain health. We can look at our, I was saying earlier about how, like, with the biological age and versus the chronological age, how there's like your energy levels to worry about. We can control these things by how we act day to day. And we're going to kind of get into that a little bit here. So looking at our musculature and our strength, that's something that we can control. I'm going to throw out a little bit of a big word here. We got sarcopenia, and that can more or less be defined as the natural loss of muscle, both in strength and size over time. And that's just as we age. Like I was saying, our process of rebuilding our cells as they, it's slower. We rebuild our cells slower as we age. And so that's just a natural part of our lives here. But there's more to it than just that. There's our muscles actually shrink if we don't challenge them. You need to strain your muscles. You need to try them out and do stuff with them to keep them from repairing slower. It'll actually repair them faster and make you feel stronger. Our bone density decreases. So without consistent exercise and function of our bones, we can actually have a decrease in our bone density. And then, like my point C here, that can lead to risks in falling. I have a few other older relatives who, are in kind of like a supportive older person home. And, sometimes I'll hear that, oh, they had a nasty fall or an incident. Having muscles that we challenge and good bone density can help prevent that. That also interplays with balance and stuff like that. So, and I put at the bottom here in quotes, if you don't use it, you lose it. Oh, that should have been my piece of advice. I'm changing mine to that. So moving on here, I got a little bit of a question, get some engagement, some interaction. And that is, how can we best prevent bone density from decreasing? I don't have them numbered, so I'm just looking for people to volunteer in the chat and in person. What do we think? Sitting all day? In the room we have sitting all day? Oh, that was a joke, apparently. Got some people in the chat saying weightlifting. What do we think?
Yeah.
Weightlifting? Yeah.
unhealthy eating is.
Well, it's almost unanimously weightlifting in the chat. And oh, agreed. Okay, cool. I'm glad we all agree. I agree with you too. In fact, I would say weightlifting is the best way to decrease losing bone density. There's actually in one of my exercise science classes, I'm at CSU, Colorado State. We learned about Wolff's Law, if anyone has ever heard of it. And Wolff's Law basically says that our bones adapt to the load and strain that we put upon them. So a good example of that, best way that I learned it, and I like to think about it, is with doing a squat. This could be, with like a barbell on your back. It could be a dumbbell, body weight. Just think of like doing a squat, right? That sitting squatting motion. In doing so, we're putting strain on our femurs, the bones in our thighs, and doing that, week after week can prevent bone density loss. And that applies across the body, not just in legs. But it's just something, a good way to visualize that. Okay, so moving to chronic disease prevention. This is an important one because in our society, especially in Western cultures, is primarily what I've learned about, we have a lot of chronic disease, especially cardiovascular. That's probably the main one that I'll be touching on here. And with that, we have our heart and metabolism. So as we age, going through these boxes here, we got our blood vessels can stiffen, that our arteries too. So the stretchiness, the elasticity of our vessels and in our arteries become harder, and they don't want to expand and constrict as much as we get older. And that's just, again, our cells aren't rebuilding as fast. They don't want to. They just kind of get stuck in the way that they are. Blood pressure can rise. That is partly due to these vessels stiffening, but I'm going to throw another big word at you all again. There's a condition called atherosclerosis, and that's basically the buildup of plaque within our arteries, lining the walls of them. So if you think of like a gardening hose, think about spraying water out of it, right? You're holding it out, and then the water comes out nicely. But then if you pinch that hose, the water is going to come out with really high pressure, right? And that's because we're decreasing the amount of space, the volume in that tube, in that hose. Same works for our vessels and arteries. The more stuff that we have in them, the less space there is in between for the blood to get through, and therefore that increases our blood pressure. Also, as we age, it's harder to regulate our blood sugar, and then all these can combine to lead to heart disease, like we're talking about, type 2 diabetes, which we'll touch on in just a few minutes here. And then according to the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, heart disease is the leading cause of death in adults in America. Yeah, it's the leading cause. And that's just goes to show like it's pretty severe, and it's been that way for a long time. So it's very important to take care of your heart and to try not to have your blood pressure be too high, right? But like I've been describing, there's a lot we can control to try to mitigate this. Our lifestyle plays a massive role in everything. Little switch up here. We're going to go into some cognition, some brain and memory. As we age, just like I've been saying, and things rebuild themselves more slowly as we get older, things happen slowly all across the board. Our ability to process information is slower. Our ability to remember things and to pull things from different parts of our mind and our memory, our recall is slower, right? But even though our brain isn't exactly like a muscle, you can't do a bicep curl for your brain, but not physically, but you can exercise your brain. You can work on memory drills. You can do things, even physical activity actually can help with brain and cognition and our cognitive function is what I mean to say. And then learning new skills, something like a foreign language, for example. I don't know, I'm sure a lot of people have had to take a foreign language before. I took Spanish in high school, and the longer I go without practicing, the harder it is for me to recall that. And so I just remember when I was doing it every day, my memory for that was really great. But now maybe I'm just older, or maybe I just don't practice enough. But it's harder to recall that Spanish and to remember everything I'm trying to remember. And so that really plays a big, really makes a big difference. And stuff like that, like doing a Sudoku, right? The numbers also, not just language and words, makes a big difference too. Along with that, we want social interaction. Having good community and staying social makes a big difference. I'm going to go back to my older relative there who, doesn't ski, and she's not doing so well. For a few years, she was living, well, with her husband. They were living by themselves. And I could just tell when I would visit that they weren't getting enough social interaction. They, seemed flustered, and it was just not that great. But then they moved into a community where they could get more assistance. And now they have a lot more social interaction. And you could tell that they're just doing better, even though they're older than they were a few years ago. So that social interaction is a really big deal. And then healthy eating, you can't go wrong there. It's always good to eat healthy. I would recommend that to a 3-year-old, a 95-year-old, and everyone in between, right? You always want to eat better, have those healthy fats, healthy foods, stay away from processed stuff. Not that I know that processed foods is bad for your brain and memory, but it doesn't hurt to eat healthy, right? And all of these on their own are great. In combination, even better. Can't go wrong there. There we go. Okay, so back to heart disease. I kind of touched on that a little bit before, but I just want to point out a few things. So that high blood pressure, I mentioned that atherosclerosis, that's definitely a big part of it. But that's not the only thing that causes heart disease. That's not the only thing that, you don't just one day have atherosclerosis, right? That comes from a few different things. That comes from being inactive, being sedentary, right? Especially nowadays, it's very easy to just be seated all day long. Most people are working just from a computer, and you're seated, hunched forward, all day, right? And then poor diet, not eating healthy foods, having a lot of processed things that are just readily made, with all the like different varying levels of fats and stuff like that's. It's very caloric, and that can lead to weight gain, which can lead to heart disease. Smoking, that's a major risk factor for people with cardiovascular disease. The research I've done shows that smoking is actually a lot less common, and also stuff I've learned from class, a lot less common nowadays than it was, 20, 40 years ago, right? But it still is a major risk factor, and it is still something that can negatively affect your health, especially with heart disease. And then being stressed, that's not as stressed as the other attributes there, the other traits that you could have that lead to heart disease. But it definitely doesn't help. If you have a really long, stressful job, you're probably going to come home after your long day and not want to have a nice, healthy Greek salad, right? You're probably going to want to come home, pick something up, or order DoorDash it on your way there, right? So being stressed all the time definitely doesn't help. Okay, into diabetes. Of course, there's type 1 and type 2. Both are genetics, and so people who have, you might be born and then get type 1 diabetes, in your first couple years of being alive, but then type 2 could develop over time. It's partially genetic, but it also can come with weight gain. That's where a lot of people end up getting it, from being overweight. And so, that can come from having that excess body fat, having that low activity, not getting enough sleep, and then, of course, your genetics. So these, of course, are two of the three biggest risk factors here: being overweight and being inactive. And then the third biggest risk factor, or one that we can do to actually lower our risk for type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease, is exercise. So kind of like the gold standard of what I've learned, in school for exercise science is you want to, if you're in a place of bad health, it's almost always great to lose weight, to eat healthier, and to exercise more. So if you do those three, you'll probably be in a good position in most cases. And then just to touch this one last time, we got exercise, kind of a common trend if you haven't noticed. We got that healthy foods, we want to eat healthy, both for our body and our mind. And then staying active socially, being socially active, very important there. Okay, I want to hop into a little bit of a discussion here. So based on what we kind of talked about today, what we learned, what are the most important things you can do to stay healthy and live longer? There's no one right answer. I just looking for a little bit of interaction here. What do we got? Put it in the chat. Let's hear from people in the room.
Red wine and chocolate.
We got red wine and chocolate from the room. From the chat, we have exercising, staying active, exercising, consistent good choices. Yeah, I like that. Stay active and be social. Yeah, good one.
I agree.
Biking to work.
Biking to work.
Biking to work. Someone
No pressure food.
Getting plenty of sleep.
good sleep, plenty of it. Yeah, these are all really good ones. I agree with all of them. Couldn't put it better myself. Yeah, I think best thing to do on top of this is just to combine them. Take care of yourself. I maybe would add in hygiene. I think good hygiene can really improve a lot. I know I didn't talk about that much in the main portion of the presentation there, but yeah, I really agree with that. All right. And kind of just to wrap up here, aging is normal. Like I was saying, there's a lot we can control. We can't control how long each day is, right? We only have 24 hours each day. So do with that what you will, if you want to live longer and healthier, like everyone just said in the chat and in person, bike to work, exercise, make good choices, eat healthy, right? Doing all this will keep your strength high. It'll allow you to stay independent for longer, so you won't have to move into an assisted living place when you're younger. It'll at least help with that. This can mitigate your risk of chronic disease like cardiovascular disease, right? That atherosclerosis that I've mentioned a couple times. Doing all these can prevent this. And overall, this can just kind of improve your quality of life. I've never heard anyone who exercises and eat healthy to say, "Oh, darn, I really don't like when I exercise." Maybe they don't enjoy exercising, but they always feel good after, right? So all this is normal. Do the best you can. I want to thank you all for your attention and joining this presentation. I'd like to open the floor to any questions, both if you have them on the Meet here, if you just want to pop that into the chat, and I'll look around the room as well. Yeah, questions?
Do you have any suggestions as far as the type of weightlifting exercises or frequency and load for bone density, bone growth?
So question from the room here, in case you couldn't hear that, recommendations for exercise for, what was the whole question again?
Specifically weightlifting exercises or frequency and load for bone growth.
Okay, specific exercises for weightlifting in frequency and load for bone growth. And was that muscle and strength too, or just bone growth?
It could be both, but since you were talking about bone density, I was focused on that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll answer it this way. I'll say that anything that you do resistance training wise is kind of going to also help with the bone density growth. We're just talking about that load, that strain, on our bones. And I mean, I think the best thing you could do is a compound movement. So that's going to be a multi-joint movement. Again, think of a squat, right? That's going to have a multi-joint being our hips. We got our knees. We have, extension and flexion of the spine, right? That's with the moving forward and back. So I think a squat is a really good exercise. I think another compound movement would be like a push-up or a bench press, like an overhead shoulder press These are great if you have access to dumbbells or barbells, doing some kind of rowing motion, pulling it from the ground or at least below you up to your body, up to your stomach. That's going to be a really great movement. And then as far as recommendations for frequency, you want to, the ACSM, American College of Sports Medicine, they recommend doing every muscle group twice a week, and you want to hit about 10 to 20 sets of exercise per muscle group. So if you're doing that squat, you want to do 10 to 20 sets of the squat per week. Or if that's the only thing you're doing, that's fine. If you add in other leg movements, that works as well. Did that answer your question? All right. Okay, cool. What else we got?
You mentioned the importance of exercise to reduce our risk of cardiovascular disease. What kinds of exercises would help us to reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease? What exercises should we be doing?
So question from the room, what exercises, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. What exercises would be best for reducing the risk of cardiovascular disease? And I think it's pretty broad to answer that. I would honestly say that all forms of exercise are beneficial for reducing the risk, but especially doing, if they call it cardiovascular exercise, and that could be running, biking, swimming, intense hiking. We want to look for, again, those guidelines recommend 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous exercise per week. And that's the main guidelines for preventing cardiovascular disease. That's going to be your bread and butter for preventing cardiovascular disease. All right. I think we have time for maybe one more, maybe two more if they're quick. Cool. All right. Looks like that's it for questions today. Thank you all so much for joining, and I hope you have a great rest of your Wednesday.
Thank you.
All right, stop.